Okay, so I've got Tamara Liebman from Calibrate Legal with me again. Thank you.
Hello again.
Hello again. We're sitting in the same spot. But while I've got Tamara, I really wanted to dig into some basics when you're setting up a company. There are things as a director and a shareholder that you need to do and not do because the company is not you. So I wanted Tamara to break that down for us into just some bite-sized chunks to help you get on your way efficiently.
Okay, sure. Sounds good.
Yeah.
I just happened to have a chat with someone yesterday that I'd met in a Facebook business group and explained to her the difference between a business and a company and being a shareholder. And she was just like, oh my gosh, I just had no idea, and this makes so much sense. And it's quite a sort of, elegant and clean when you think about it, but I think a lot of people sort of don't, and I see a lot of confusion between what is a business and what is a company. So first we'll go back one step and say, what kind of entity can own a business? So firstly, it can be what we call a sole trader, which is, say, me. Hi, I'm Tamara Liebman. I am a sole trader trading as Calibrate Legal. So it is just me. My personal IRD number is the same as my business's IRD number, and I just trade, and it's all in one. However, if I want to separate my business out to be owned by a different entity that I own, then I will form a company. So then I will go to the company's office and I will apply to register a company, Tamara Liebman Limited, and I will be the sole shareholder. I will say I'll have 100 shares in Tamara Liebman Limited, and I will appoint myself as director. And then my business will be owned by Tamara Liebman Limited. So it will be Tamara Liebman Limited trading as Calibrate Legal. So those are the two most sort of straightforward ways of owning a business.
Yep.
Okay, so now that company is not me. That company is owned by me, but it is not me. But it is a legal person that goes out into the world and does stuff. And it enters into contracts and it borrows money and it has obligations, say, under the Health and Safety and Employment Act, and it, as well as me personally, and so on. So that is the difference between sort of a sole trader and a company. A company can live forever. That's the other difference, and a human can't.
Yes.
So, we have companies around in the world that are, that are a couple of 100 years old.
Yeah.
So, and then in a company, there are basically two types of, two roles that a person can have, a human can have, and it is to be a director or to be a shareholder. So a shareholder is, what it says, it's a person who owns shares of the company. And a director is a person who is whose job it is to govern the company. So, and those roles are quite clearly defined under companies legislation. So in New Zealand, the Companies Act, says, what the director's duties are. Shareholders don't really have duties. Shareholders have rights. So they have right to vote at shareholders meetings in relation to things that the company does that are different to the way, say, the decisions that board members might make, directors who are board members might make. And then the other thing that shareholders have a right to, the default position is that shareholders have a right to receive profit distributions from the company. And generally directors, say actually a good example of what the two different roles are is that directors make the decision about whether the company can issue a distribution. Has it got enough profit? Is it solvent? All these kinds of things. Does it, need the money for something else? Yes, okay, we've got $50,000 this year to distribute. The board will distribute to the shareholder, and then the shareholder will receive that profit distribution. So, I am the same person, Tamara, but me as director, I have made a decision to distribute profits to me as shareholder. Yeah. So, I think those are the sort of the two key differences. Management is actually a third thing. So, a director might not actually necessarily be a manager. So a lot of directors are managing directors, and you've heard that expression. But a lot of directors might not be managing directors. Some directors are independent directors, which means that they don't have a personal financial interest in the company. They're not shareholders.
Yep.
Executive directors is another expression, and those are people who are directors and work in the company, but might not be shareholders. But the job of the board of directors is to govern the company, and it's to make the big decisions about how it operates, what its strategy is, what its budget is, and directors are supposed to have regular meetings, and definitely under the law at least one a year, and then directors have very strict duties under the Companies Act as well. And, for example, the duty not to allow the company to trade while insolvent, the duty not to act recklessly in relation to the way the company trades, that sort of thing. And these duties are actually, breaches of these duties can be enforced by prosecutions. And, these don't happen often, but if the breaches are bad enough and have harmed enough people, say, for example, investors, investors who lose a great deal of money, like in crashes, if the directors have found to have breached duties, then they can be prosecuted. So, being a director is actually quite a big deal. If you don't understand your duties as a director, you should probably not be one. Having said that, if you're the sole director and shareholder, then you don't have any, your duties towards the shareholder aren't, such a big deal, but you still have duties towards the public and to creditors. So again, it's something to think about. Are you prepared to take that responsibility on? And then shareholders. Well, shareholders are basically, hang around waiting for their dividends. Shareholders are entitled to attend annual general meetings once a year. So those are the meetings of the shareholders. Some shareholders may have voting rights and some may not, but everyone's entitled to attend. Shareholders aren't necessarily entitled to receive copies of financial statements. If that is something that a shareholder wants to have the right to have, then it needs to be built into the company's, constitution and shareholders agreement. So actually, let's talk about these two documents that I just mentioned.
Yes.
Right. So when you form a company in New Zealand, you can just run it under the Companies Act. But the Companies Act has just got the basic framework that really only suits companies with one shareholder director who are the same person.
Okay.
It's sort of very limited flexibility about how you can do things, and very limited mechanisms for dealing with disputes, right? So if you are going to have more than two shareholders, or more than one shareholder, two or more, then you should have a constitution. So a constitution is a document that tells the directors how the company is to be governed, and then you can. And most constitutions have a lot more mechanisms in them for dealing with disputes and for dealing with shareholders coming and going, that sort of thing. And on top, constitution can also have built into it arrangements between shareholders. But that's not always a very popular option to have it built in, because constitutions are public documents that are registered against the company in the Companies Office Register.
And when you're forming your company, you have to say it has a constitution or not. There's that box, and this is the part.
And if it does, then you upload it.
Yes.
But you can always adopt a constitution at any time, but then as soon as you've adopted the constitution, you have 10 working days to upload it, and if you haven't, then that's a infringement. So the alternative is to have a shareholders agreement, and that's a private contract between the shareholders about how they will, what their rights and obligations are in relation to their ownership of the company. So shareholders agreements are very, very, very important. If you have more than one shareholder and you don't have a shareholders agreement, then you will probably have a problem where one shareholder, say, wants to exit, and wants the other shareholder to buy them out. And if the other shareholder says, nah, don't want to, or they can't agree on the value of the shares, there's pretty much no mechanism for working through that, and you'll have to go to court. So it's always preferable to have a shareholders agreement where you have entry and exit provisions, where you have obligations on shareholders about if they need to contribute their time or money in some way, it needs to go in that agreement. If they, if you if the company wants shareholders not to set up a competing company. That's a restraint of trade that needs to go into the shareholders agreement, that sort of thing. And okay, so you've got a contract, doesn't guarantee that people will comply with it, and you might still end up in court, enforcing the contract, but it's much easier to sort out because actually everything was previously agreed and written into the agreement.
And if you write it down while everyone's feeling good and has the same bold vision for the future, it's probably far simpler to agree on what that is than in hindsight, oh, no, that's not what I thought we were going to do. That's not what I see happening.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm always, very strongly encouraging people to set them up right at the beginning before anyone puts any money in, because the more you start contributing and participating, the less incentive there is to actually get the document done.
Yes.
Or at least on the part of some people. As opposed to others, perhaps. And then people often get really busy. Once you get really busy working in the business, then, as everyone knows, you have less time to work on the business.
Yes.
And these things just don't get done. And very often you see, draft agreements that have never been finalised. And, they're useful in a court case, like for the court to understand what the intentions might have been, but they're not, binding contracts. So, and unfortunately in my practice, that is the one job I see that is the least likely to actually get done. Yeah. And I'm often following people up, very frequently for a long time saying, can we get this done? I just don't want to see this not done. Yeah. So, that's a little plea from your friendly business lawyer. Please get your shareholders agreement done.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I suppose it's like a will or life insurance or health insurance that you kind of go at the crux of the time where you really needed that provision and you don't have it. You're going to be really wishing that you did. Yeah.
When your former friend goes off and starts a competing business, including taking intellectual property from your company, that is when you're going to wish you'd had your shareholders agreement in place. Yeah. And, relationships are great until there's a breakdown.
Yes.
And they do break down.
Yes.
And family-owned companies also very risky.
Yes.
Family members have relationship breakdowns.
Yes.
As well. Yeah.
I have a question about what if a shareholder who's not a director wants to have their ideas or views included? Like, what if someone wants more of a governing influence than they're otherwise entitled to if they're not a director?
Directors don't need to listen.
Yeah,
unless it's, usually if you have a shareholders agreement, that is, there's usually a list of company actions that are reserved for shareholders. So a company can't do certain things unless, say, 75% or 100% of the shareholders agree. So again, that requires that having been agreed ahead of time, before it's needed. But a shareholder who doesn't have a right to appoint a director because they don't have enough shares, then has no influence in terms of the governance of the company.
And what if, I have seen people running something past a shareholder who's not a director before being able to, that person's kind of a director in everything but name.
Yeah. Well, directors can take advice from anyone they like, but the decisions are their own and they need to be, making them in a, responsible way and acting as a fiduciary to the company. Directors have to, a fiduciary is somebody that is a person who should, their first duty is to the company's in the company's best interest, right? So they can't be doing things that are for the benefit of a shareholder over the benefit of a company. So unless the Constitution allows it, for one thing. So that's with respect to the director. Shareholders who are so influential in companies that they could be considered directors, they need to be careful because they might be, if something goes wrong under the law, they might be considered directors because they're acting as if they are. So they're shadowy directors, and there is, in order to prevent people, directors offloading, their big decisions to non-directors, the law captures these shadow directors as well.
So, that's kind of like a little bite-sized chunk on Companies 101, but a company is a separate entity from you, a limited company once it's established.
Yeah.
And then there are clear distinctions between being a director and a shareholder and the obligations and rights and everything of each.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And so I guess when you're starting out, slow down and actually understand what the difference is between those three things and what you need to be doing in order for them to provide you with the protections and benefits that you think you're getting.
Yeah. Yeah.
And again, people like Tamara who can easily explain it in a digestible way is probably a good place to start.
Yeah, although I would say actually the company's website is full of really well-written articles and all the basic information, all the topics that that you could ever think of at the beginning. Like it's all there. This the Ministry of Business and Innovation has really, all of its websites are super helpful and really written in plain English, and we're very lucky in New Zealand to have such good support, I think.
Yeah, and that the bar's so low for starting business in New Zealand as well.
So easy to, you just register a business at midnight if you feel, like, you wake up and go, I'd like to register a company, and you can just register it, which is not the same in other countries. It's harder. Just one thing, if I could mention, the Companies Register does now check directors' addresses if they look a bit dodgy, because you need to have, directors need to register their actual residential address. That's the law. So if you register something that looks like a business address or it's got the same address as your company, they won't approve it, and they will ask you for proof of address like a power bill or a water bill or something like that, which they didn't do in the past. So just be aware of that. Yeah. I just thought I'd throw that in there because people do get, they get into trouble. And if you don't provide that information, then you won't get registered or you'll get deregistered. Yeah, it's pretty strict.
I think that's a funny thing, actually, having to provide your home address publicly.
So the reason for that is creditors or other claimants need to be able to serve documents on the company. So they need to be able to serve them in person, so either at the registered office or on a director. So if sometimes a registered office is inaccessible, like if you've moved out, you've locked the doors, there's no one there, how is a creditor supposed to serve you? Well, they need to be able to go to the director. So for the protection of creditors and the public, there is an address, it needs to be the director's address. So obviously there are problems, this is becoming an issue because a lot of people are concerned about their personal safety, and there are organisations that are trying to get this changed so that it's possible to, in some cases, hide your address if you have genuine concerns about your personal risk. But at the moment, that's the reason for it. If you're going to start a company and work with the public, you need to be able to back it up and be available to deal with issues. That's the policy.
That's easy.
Yeah, but not shareholders. They can hide. That's all right.
And those sneaky shareholders who are behaving like directors are not directors.
No. Yeah.
Have a word with those guys.
Yeah.
Cool. All right. Well, I'll leave some contact information for Tamara, and so you can get the right structures in place and make sure you're doing the right thing by the company's acts and stuff. And Tamara's fun to work with.
Yeah, look forward to helping anyone out. But I do think definitely go to the company's office for information first. It's free, unlike me. So
cool. Thank you.
Thanks, Jemma.